Okay, so welcome to the Ultra Running Sam podcast, proudly presented by our long-term sponsor, Goku Projects, who make the best trail running caps out there. We've worked with Daryl and Goku for many years, the long history with us on the podcast. So only fair to give them first shout outs on this little advertising intro. So while we're talking about sponsors, we've picked up a new sponsor, so Phoenix Head Torches. Now, if you have any association with any of the big long ultras that go through the night, then head torches are essential. So you know how needed these things are especially in the British wintertime. You've probably heard me bang on about these during the spine and how good they are. Now, they're a new sponsor of the podcast, but I've been using Phoenix Head Torches for a couple of years now because of how good they are and the reputation that they have for being basically indestructible, and the amazing performance that they give you. Literally, during the whole of the spine, they charge up really quickly, and I never ever felt like I didn't have enough light out there. So they're a new sponsor of the podcast going forward. They want to get involved more with they're a Chinese company. They want to get involved a bit more with the UK trail running industry. So we've teamed up to help get them out there. A lot of people know who they are already, but if you haven't heard of them, then check out my Instagram, and there'll be some discount codes coming. And as always with Goku, there'll always be discount codes knocking around. So I probably sent them out before, but if there isn't one showing on my Instagram page, then just send me a DM and I'll get those codes to you. Okay, so obligations are done. On with the show. Okay, so welcome to the Ultra Running Sam podcast. So in this interview, we're chatting with Hugh Chatfield. So some of you will know Hugh as a returning guest. So we had Hugh on last year after he won the Dragon's Back, and we've sort of kept in touch. And I saw that he was doing some interesting training ahead of UTMB at the end of the month. So I thought he would be a great choice to get on and have a chat about what he plans to do there. And also it ties in with the last interview that we did with Keith and Tom, because Hugh's on the same elite trail team as Keith, and Tom's hoping to join apparently. So there's a bit of banter there between the three of them. They're good mates. So it was optimal that we have Hugh on now. So I will let him into the meeting shortly. Yes, we are recording. So Hugh, welcome to the Ultra Running Sam podcast. Not for the first time, you are a returning guest. This is number 2. So you join a small elite group of of elite runners that can have that on their running CV that they've been on twice.
This time individually, though. I believe I shared the spotlight this time with Robin.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Yeah. So yeah, you get all of the attention now. So awesome. So I had a couple of likely lads on last week.
Yeah, the dastardly duo.
The dastardly duo, Tom and Keith. So I was just saying in the sort of preamble before the episode that this sort of ties in really well having you on. Keep the theme going and stuff. So I won't ask you the superhero question because I always, you've been on before, so we'll dispense with the history. But for people that sort of don't know who you are, you came on last time after Dragon's Back, didn't you, last year? So you had a great win there at Dragon's Back. So what have you been doing since then? Since we last spoke last year?
Yeah, running a whole bunch, I think, is the short amount of it. I think then that the Dragon's Back really marked a step up in the seriousness with which I've taken running. I think like preparing for that marked a step up in the seriousness with which I took running, and post the Dragon's Back has marked another step up, and that's both. I think Keith mentioned this, so we both joined a new trail running team called the Elite Trail Team, which has changed how I approach training, food and nutrition, sleep, psychology is like we've picked off with experts all of those different things, and so all of those things look quite different, and that's fed what I'd describe was a new level of competitiveness as well this year. So I raced UTS again, the same distance, and came out 50 minutes quicker or something like that. And I raced Trans Gran Canaria Advanced, which is the kind of 80k direct line in one of those like World Trail Majors races in when was it, springtime as well. And so both of those have gone really well. Then a couple of little fell races, but then we've really wrapped down the racing to focus hard on the training to prepare for CCC in August. So quite a lot's changed actually since we last spoke, my approach to training, and also I think the level at which I'm competing has taken another step up, which is exciting, but also bold to say a couple of weeks before a race.
So you've gone from training like you want to be a professional to sort of professional training now. Is that
Yeah, I think that's true. So I mean, if we just take training, I doubt the volume is that different in terms of like hours, and I know the distance is pretty similar. I'm probably covering a bit more vert, but the nature of the sessions is quite different, and I prioritize them a bit more. So I think the Hugh you spoke to a year ago was doing the basics well. Like I was training a lot in Z1, Z2. I wasn't running my easy runs hard, which is I guess like the first step. I was running my easy runs easy, but I now do far more, and I heard Keith mention this as well, I now do far more race specific sessions. And I also really am dialing in that mantra of hard runs hard and easy runs easy, and really distinguishing them in quite a big way. So yeah, like I mean, a typical training week back then would have been 4 days easy, 1 hard session, 1 longer run, and a rest day. And now I'm probably doing well, there's still a long run. Most weeks I probably don't have a rest day. I just run an easy run. I've probably got 2 threshold days each week plus the long run, and those threshold days are much more specific than the threshold runs I used to run. And I think I've done it in the right order. You know, when I started working with Doug, who was coaching at the Elite Trail team, my previous coach was Marcus Scotney, also a kind of name in ultra running. And I think Marcus did a really good job of building a base. So this is how you follow a training plan. This is what training at scale and volume feels like. And Doug's gone from that base and has added in these specific and sometimes very hard sessions. And I mentioned sort of sleep and food. Had I looked at this training plan a year ago, I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done a week of the type of training I've done now. I'd have faltered in 3 or 4 days because I wouldn't have been eating right or sleeping right or had my gauging my effort levels right. So those things are pretty different.
That's interesting that it's almost like he had to have had that experience with Marcus first to get
I think so.
To get you into that sort of zone of following plans and being, because like you say, it can, if you know, like a top end, not that I'm saying that Marcus isn't a top end coach, like with your new coaching structure, because it's such a, you know, you're going into the sort of elite levels now, that if you were given that kind of workout program, like you say, a year ago, it would have been too much for you to focus on, and you would have, like you say, you would have faltered on it. So having that base structure already in place, from a previous coach has allowed you to sort of, So I suppose there's something to be said in there for people coming into the sport and thinking, I've got to get an elite coach to train me. But sometimes you don't need that. You're not an elite runner, but there's the differentiation there, isn't there? That as you progress, the type of training that you need is changing, isn't it?
100%, 100%. Yeah. As I said, I really want to dwell on that point that I remember chatting with Keith about it as well, because we both onboarded with Doug at a similar time, and we both looked at these kind of early training weeks we had, and we were both, well, I was definitely apprehensive, and I think Keith was, I don't know if he'd admit it now, but I was definitely apprehensive about some of the difficulty there. But I knew I could do 14, 15, 16 hours a week or whatever of training. So I was like, well, I know I can do this volume. So it's about finding this new level within it. Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, had I met Doug 2 years ago, maybe he'd have done the same thing. And if I was still working with Marcus, he'd have maybe done the same thing. And I didn't leave Marcus on bad terms at all. It was just this opportunity to join this team that brought with it some coaching and some community and these other bits and pieces. So it was just the next logical step.
Yeah, that's it. And I suppose that's all you want from people that you coach. You just want them to progress, and if their progression means that it's not with you, then that's how it is. And a good coach will always just say, yeah, go and
Yeah,
do what you've
exactly.
got to do. Yeah, so it's interesting, the training. So I picked up on when I was talking to the lads. So I picked up on that workout that you posted a video of you
Oh yeah.
filling the water bottles. So for people that haven't seen it, it's a very fancy video that you've put on of you basically doing like hill repeats, aren't you?
Yeah.
Weighted hill repeats, but
Yeah.
not in like the traditional way that you'd see people do it before, like by putting a weighted vest on or by putting rocks in their backpack or something.
Yeah, I do it with water. So I've done
The
it twice
water
now.
thing.
So that's a specific. So basically, I'm all eyes on the CCC. So 3 weeks out, we've got this 100K race in Chamonix, which covers about 6,000 meters of climb. And so we're thinking about how to, perfect that session. And we've been through a sort of VO2 max block, and now it's more about it's basically an endurance climbing block, really. And yeah, so we do a long run on a Saturday, and at the moment, and on a Sunday, I'm doing like a sort of a tired legs weighted climb. And yeah, if I feel bad or whatever, then I wouldn't do it and I wouldn't push. But so it's like assuming I still got that strength and that feeling, I'm doing that session. So I've done it twice, 3 times now. Yeah, so I'm feeling about 7.5 liters of water at the bottom of a climb, which is just over 10% body weight. And there's a bit of background science that if once you're then training like 20 and 30% body weight, you're doing something, it changes how you move. So the idea is you're moving still in a similar way, but with a weight that tires your legs. And you're not, well, I'm not at least going into this sort of threshold zone, maybe touching it, but I'm like climbing it a hard but manageable climb. So yeah, so I did one on Wansfell where I went up and down. I don't know if people know the lakes, but it's a fell outside Ambleside, which I did about 7 times a few weeks ago, to the amusement of tourists who were doing it once. And then this weekend I did it on Harrison Stickle, which is one of the Langdales out of the Dungeon Gill car parks, 3 times, which was also to the amusement of some tourists doing it. And I came across a group of fell runners on the top who were doing a long kind of round. And I opened my bag and pulled out like 7 liters of water. It was a hot day. And they're like, yes, please don't pour that away. We want that. And they started emptying it on themselves. They're performing with the service. Yeah, I think it's a good session. I think it replicates how I will climb the last 3 climbs on the CCC, which is in this kind of like trundle mode. Yeah, because if I go and do a long run, I can run much more of the climbs than I will be able to run on race day. And so replicating that need to walk, I think it's been good. And yeah, just get used to like spending 3 hours walking uphill and your legs feeling tired. I think is a good thing.
And I thought it was so I've not even like seen anybody do that. I know some people had said they've sort of seen it before, but I hadn't seen that workout before, and I just found it, it's quite novel, isn't it? But it makes perfect sense. So you're carrying the water up there,
Yeah,
and then you're
emptying
it out at the top, so that when you come down, you haven't got those forces, those eccentric forces going through, your quads and everything. Because that's the worst thing, isn't it? When you're doing like hill repeats, is the
descending.
The coming down and that force that you get. It takes longer for your quads to recover, doesn't it, than
100%. And the workout is descend light. So you descend easy. And in fact, I've done the last descent in each one harder, but more with a technique focus than an effort focus. So it's, descend easy with a really light pack. And then, sit in a river at the bottom, filling them all up and then crack on again. Yeah.
But when you talk about the like specificity, I got that word right of like these workouts. How much recceing have you gone to do? Have you been out? I don't know. Have you been out there before and done stuff?
So not until this year. So I don't know if you sort of follow my journey from the last podcast. I like picking off a new really hard challenge and then putting all the bits together to make it happen. So that happened with the Bob Graham, that happened with the Dragon's Back, and now the CCC's been the next one. And so each of the previous 2 years, I've had a recce schedule built around that. I did a Bob Graham set of recce's, did a set of recce's around the Dragon's Back, and this year I've done a set of recce's around the CCC. So I've been very lucky to fly out twice, and I've done the whole course in order. First time over 3 days, and the second time over 2 days with a running pack. So I've been running it, but a slightly heavier pack than I have on race day because I've got Jeet gear, I guess. But so I've now seen it twice, so I do know the challenge that this is, and this really is a significant challenge. If it was just go round, that's covered. I know I can do a 100K course now. 2 years ago, I didn't know I could do that, but now that's okay. But the challenge now is to do that particular 100K course at a fast time or a competitive time, which is making it quite scary and quite exciting at equal measure.
Have you looked into that sort of the competition and what times
Mm.
that you know already have been sort of posted for that race and how you
Yeah.
sort of see the field?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So, I mean, last year's winner was a Brit, John Albon, ran a ridiculously fast time last year, something in the 10 hours, under 10 hours 30, I think he did. I don't know if I'm going to reveal my target time. I'm not planning to do 10 and a half hours.
Don't reveal.
Yes, I'm trying to do something competitive. My scratch rank, so my like UTMB points-based ranking, puts me at 144th or something, which I think I would say that's an under. I don't think it's too cocky to say that's an under ranking, because there's a bunch of people who get a UTMB ranking but don't have a 100K ranking, so it'll be their first 100K, for example, and blah blah blah. And I think I'm also a little bit underrated because I'm still only on 4 rated 100Ks, and I think the maths works by they discount you until you've done 5. So I'm currently living in this like slightly underranked zone. But yeah, it's super competitive. So normally if you go to a race in the UK, an ultra race in the UK, typically there might be 2 or 3 quick runners. And they'll have a good race. I mean, look at the Lakeland 100 with Gavin Mark and Kim. 3 or 4, maybe 5 elite level runners and have a good race. Then you go to like UTS. It's probably the most competitive, and you get a slightly deeper international field. There were probably an elite field of 10 runners there this year, all of whom were sort of vying for podium. And then you go to this race, and the elite field, you just keep scrolling, and you keep scrolling, and you keep scrolling. And it's a bit crazy. And you've got to remember that the people can hold their rating for a long time. So the ratings, the deflation in ratings takes quite a long time. So you've got a lot of people that may not have run a competitive time recently or blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's a very deep field, whichever way you want to cut it. And they're going to be going all guns blazing up that first climb, which, if you don't know the route, is about anywhere between an hour and 15. And well, in the elite field, it's anywhere between an hour and 15 and an hour and 45 minutes of climbing off the bat, up 1,300 odd meters or whatever it is, at altitude. So you go off the line with this crazy set of hyped runners in the most competitive race they've ever been in. Yeah, it's a whole different challenge.
How are you sort of feeling about that? Are you sort of like, you just fully like embracing it, or have you got some, some trepidation with it, or are you just gonna for it?
So I'm generally excited about the whole experience and opportunity to race at this level, and feel like justified in being within the elite 10 and being like, I think I have the fitness and the skill set to run an elite time, whatever that might be. But yeah, it is also quite scary, because I think it's really, you always get the issue at ultras of sort of like start line fever, if everyone goes fast. And I think the lads talked about it last week. I mean, I've not run it at CCC, but everything I can see from the stats looks like that times 10. So that is making me a little bit apprehensive. One of the other things that's part of this trail team is that I've been working with someone called Josephine Perry, who's a sports psychologist. We've not done a planning session for CCC yet, but I hope we will do. And we did one for UTS and one for Transgran Canaria. And that's been helpful, as she asks it's sports psychology. So she asks you a series of sort of intelligent and thought through questions to help you form your race visualization and your race mantras that are going to help you at the points that matter for you. And so previously we've used that to talk about how I'm going to deal with bonking and what sort of mantras and what mental strategies I'm going to apply when I feel low. So I feel that's in order. And I think probably what I'm going to talk about with her now is what my mindset is going to be for the first 2 hours. Because I'm pretty confident in my ability to like make progress once we're over that ridiculous start, but I'm not quite sure how to manage that start yet. So yeah.
There's so much in sports psychology now, isn't there? I was interviewing Jack Scott for one of these films that I've been doing, and what he likes to talk. I love Jack, but he can talk and talk and talk. But I had to like edit out a lot of it. But he went on for about 7 minutes just talking about how he prepared mentally, which is obviously like a massive deal with spine race, to like your mentally is massive. But so this sort of support that you've got with, like a dietitian, like coaches,
Yeah.
Sports psychology. Are you finding that this is all new to you, or is it quite easy to sort of take on board?
Yeah. So I think each of those elements has changed. So my mind game is different. Maybe not different in the ways when I had the first session I expected it to be, but I definitely have different like mental mantras and strategies. I eat differently than I did a year ago. Few changes, but the main one is I actively eat more protein than I used to, and I think much more carefully about fueling my training. So there's lots more in that, but those two things are different. I've talked about my training being different and the structure of the sessions. And then my sleep that's the other bit, is a sleep scientist called Charlotte. And my sleep is getting there. That's a bit that's been a bit slower and harder to budge because I do still work full time. And so training is sort of squeezed around life. And then it eats into my evening. And then if I've got to eat afterwards or whatever. So sleep, I haven't quite been able to hit my goals for that, but the other bits are definitely in play. Yeah, they all changed.
Sleep's one of those things I know I've said before. Like, if you could buy sleep, I would like buy sleep.
Yeah, what would be greatly? Gosh.
If you could, if you could pay a subscription to get like an extra 2 hours sleep every night, that'd be like the.
If you come up with that, Sam, you should ditch the podcast game and start selling that product.
Subscription sleep. We could call it SSS, some sleep subscription. Sign up.
I'd pay.
I think most people would pay, wouldn't they?
No.
What are you hoping to? I know we're not talking about sort of your your goal time or anything like that, but how are you sort of? Are you hoping for? Try and think of a question without asking you. Are you going for the podium?
No, I'm not going for the podium. I don't think that's realistic. And also it brings me on to a good point. And you'll have heard this from Keith and Tom last week. Both of them, first of all, described or think about their goals in terms of time before thinking about where that then places them. And I think you have to do the same thing, because so much of like whether you're on the podium or not is out of your control. It's about how other people perform and how other people show up. Whereas there's much more of the time you run that's pending weather that's in your control. So I think it's more motivating and easier to deal with and rationalize afterwards if you think about goals in terms of time, which is something that actually Josie was mentioning is sort of taught me as well. Because before I'd have rocked up at a race like this and been like, well, I want to place X, and I definitely have some thinking about what X position might be successful, but that's translated from this is the time I want to run, and I think that will roughly place me in this part of the field, not I want to finish in this part of the field, therefore I have to run this kind of time. I think the only exception with that is if you were looking to win this race, in which case you would need to probably work back the other way. Like a winning time is probably in the low 10 hours, which is just bonkers if you do the maths. But yeah, I thought about it that way in terms of time, because I think then you can build a plan around nutrition, around checkpoint times. Because if you plan to be in 5th position or whatever it is, then it's like, well, that could be anywhere. And John Alban, I can't remember exactly, but he was something like 30th. I don't want to get it wrong, but he was way back, still very high up, but way back in the field over the first climb, and then reeled everyone back in. So
yeah, that's
running to be in the first position.
Yeah. That's the point that Tom made, wasn't it? About he'd looked at all the stats suddenly, and he'd seen that the top 20 had done something specifically, and then everyone else.
So he looked at UTMB, so he looked at the full lap rather than the wimpy half lap that I've signed up to do, which and he split the top 20 and on 20 to 40, or maybe it was 1 to 10, 10 to 20, and looked at the percentage of their time that was accounted for by earlier stages and later stages, and showed, not sure if it was statistically significant, but visually significant, a pattern that showed, the faster runners start relatively slower. They might still be quicker than a slower runner, but relatively speaking within themselves, they're speeding up relative to the rest of the field.
Yeah. So how do you sort of, what do you work in, heart rate, or do you work in RPE? So when you're thinking about your sort of the effort level that you're putting in on over those first 2 hours, what are you gauging it by?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I haven't fully answered this yet. So in training, I'm practically always thinking about heart rate, not always, but mostly it's based on heart rate, and RPE comes a bit later. There's a few exceptions where you're deliberately training tired or something, quite rarely, but mostly it's all about heart rate. In that first 3 hours, I mean, yeah, there is, and Keith mentioned it, right? There is a bit of a rule, which is quite scientifically based, which is if the moment you're in your second threshold level, so you're in your like sprinting level, then you are doing damage that you will find it very hard to recover from. So I think, you really do need to keep it below what's called Z4, that kind of like unsustainable threshold pace, that kind of like 5-10K heart rate, because you won't, well, you might recover, but you're really stacking the odds against yourself. So I think that is a good thing. But the start of a race, there is always an RPE heart rate disconnect because of the environment, the adrenaline, the fact you've tapered and you're well rested. You can often hit a higher heart rate, a higher pace level for a lower level of RPE if you've done 2 weeks of taper and you're running in a field and it's all about that and you're well fueled and well fed and everything. So it is a bit hard to manage. I think you have to do it on heart rate, and then probably on timing as well. So I've got a rough target time for the top of the first climb. But the problem with timing is I won't know until I'm at the top of the first climb whether like I'm on that or not, by which point there's like only a couple of minutes to adjust. Yeah. So I think it has to be on heart rate. I don't see any other allowing a few beats per minute higher in that than you would normally. I can't see any other way of doing it really.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And that will mean I think it will mean people who I've like eyed out as maybe similar runners or know of probably moving away. And that's probably right.
Are you comfortable with that? Like letting people go? Do you feel like you've had enough over the years, enough race experience to know your own race sort of thing? It's like the thing into it that you always say, like run your own race.
Yeah. I wish I could believe it more than like I wish I want to keep developing that skill. But I think so. And I've got some pretty strong data points. I mean, a good one is UTS. So Keith and I, Keith was probably, I can't remember, we looked at it, but he was multiple minutes up about 4 hours in. And then 8 hours in, I was multiple minutes up. So you can, in ultras, you can swing gaps gaps can swing quite significantly. But just because you're moving 5-10 seconds a kilometer quicker over, that or a few minutes a kilometer on a big climb, these things can really, really change because you've got that, because you're playing the game of averages rather than the game of sprints. So, I really like to think I can think back on those data points and be like, you can believe it, but still hard because once they are gone, then you might never get them back. So all these thoughts do get in. But yeah, I think the more you can move in that direction of thinking about goal time, your own race, I think probably ingredients for success more so than I think you're playing a riskier game if you start playing that I'm going to chase X runner and define myself by what position I finish in. Because there's far more things out of your control. You're playing a lottery. Whereas if you go, okay, I'm going to run this kind of time, this kind of effort level, then you're like controlling things more. So that seems sensible.
Because it can seem like from the outside when you're watching somebody race, like for example, we talked with the lads about Western States and how like Jim he almost seemed like flustered that somebody was like really close to him, but he didn't really seem to change what he was doing, although there was talk of him like playing like mind games with him with Rod.
Yeah, with Rob.
What's his last name?
Yeah, Favard. I don't know how to pronounce it. Favard.
Favard, yeah.
Favard.
And you just wonder how much, because he still won the race. And he was like, they were talking about when he was coming like towards Roby Point, they were saying, he can still break his own record, but he didn't. And did he just sort of, it's really interesting, like the mindset of elite runners, that do you have a plan going into it and then stick to it, or do you sort of are you okay with changing things on the fly? Is that something that you've sort of found yourself where like in a race where you thought you got it all wrapped up and then things change?
Yeah. So two things. One, it is still a race, right? So you still have to at some point race other people and picking people off and racing competitors at parts of the race has definitely got to be, it's part of the fun, it's part of the challenge. It's just not a time trial, right? Like quite sort of by definition. So I don't want to completely discount that like racing other people point, and it will play a role in my race. But I think probably I'm trying to just rebalance things. So you want to think, especially in a really long race, it's different to a 5K or a 10K. You are like racing yourself first of all, and then other people second of all, I think. In terms of like adapting on the fly, I think it's a fundamental skill of ultra running, right? So I think Courtney talks about her filing cabinet of like, when I face a problem, I rifle through my mental filing cabinet and think about have I dealt with this before and what's the like recipe. Heard that quote. I think it was Courtney. Yeah, but I felt that in my own running. So I'll take UTS, for example, and TGC in both races this year. And Dragon's Back as well. We probably talked about that. At UTS, yeah, so I left the line missing 2 hours worth of food that had fallen out of my bag in the car on the way to the drive, on the drive to the start line. So I'm running up Snowdon, the first climb, and I reach into my pocket and I go, oh, wait, that's not enough food to get me to Capel Curig, which was where I got my drop bag and picked up more. Oh, sorry, to the Ogwen Valley, which is where I met Millie, who had the next bit of food. So I was missing an hour and a half to 2 hours of food. And I eat a lot and I plan to eat a lot, and that was a key part of my like race strategy for that day was fueling. And so that's quite a big moment when you're running through Clogwyn, halfway up that climb up Snowdon. You're like, oh, this isn't enough food. I'll get there, but this is not enough food to run at the pace I want to run. And what do you do? So you have to problem solve. So my first strategy was, well, maybe there'll be food at the first checkpoint, which is down in the Penny Pass. There wasn't. So then I was like, well, if there isn't food there, I'm going to have to ask competitors if they have any spare food, and that's it, right? Or I'm going to have to like ration my food and slow down and eat more later. Like I have to do one of these two things. There's no other option. Luckily I was still with Keith and Gavin, and I asked them, hey, I've dropped some food, do you each have like half a gel or half a bar that I could have? And both of them luckily each gave me a piece. And so then I was able to build up. I was doing the maths in my head. I was still like 30 grams down on plan or something. But when I got to the checkpoint, I immediately ate that back and resumed the plan. So I don't think that I'd probably mess with my head a bit, but like you have to solve problems like that. Yeah, a number of times like bits on the top of my water bottle, there's like plastic caps on the soft flask, they fly off. I had that on a long run the other day, and you're running with one water bottle, you're like, okay, well I have to fill up more. You just have to deal with those things.
It is.
I think it's key.
Yeah, it is fundamental, isn't it, to ultra running, problem solving. Yeah, absolutely.
Massively. And keeping everything in check and not letting your heart rate go and not getting stressed and that kind of thing. Yeah, 100%.
Do you think that's something that, just do you think beginners can sort of have that mindset as well, or do you think it is just something that you build up over years of racing?
I don't. Well, I'm not particularly experienced at this level, so yeah, I don't. Clearly, it comes with experience. Like the more, like the filing cabinet, the more problems you've solved in the past. Yeah, and I definitely have that with bonking or feeling low. When that feeling comes, I recognize it. I don't get scared. I know, like, I can now probably push harder through it because I know what it feels like and how it works. So yeah, it definitely comes with experience. But also I think it's one of the attractive things about ultra running relative to like short distance threshold or middle distance threshold running, because there you don't really need to do this in the same way. You may be, okay, someone kicked when you didn't expect them to, but it's much more like spur of the moment, thinking fast. Whereas in these ultras, you can think slow and you can plan and you can readjust and you can redo the maths and you can readjust your splits and when you're going to push and when you're not going to split, when you're not going to push. And I think that's one of the attractive things about ultra running as a discipline. Like it's more than just like how big is your VO2 max. Like there are some other variables.
Just going back to UTS. So I was just flicking through your Instagram, and I've forgotten that you and Keith came in together, didn't you? So yeah. He's claiming a podium position on that race. So what? How does that work?
Well, we both finished fourth, so we're in that like extended podium. So I think we were on the podium together at the end. It depends what you define as the podium. How did that work? So we spent a lot of time training together for that race specifically. We met in that race in 2023 when he ran past me about halfway through as I was bonking hard and I was fiddling with a gate. I was trying to go over it and he like opened it, looked at me like I was an idiot and went, work smarter, not harder, and then ran off into the distance and I never saw him again. And then through that we started chatting a bit about running. We did the OMM together last year and then we trained a lot for this race together. We did a couple of recce together, recce runs together. We trained quite a lot in the Lake District, doing some long runs together, and sort of just like, spent, because doing a 6-hour run is much better shared than it is by yourself, especially with someone of a similar level. So that was good. And we'd actually talked about on one of the recce's going over the penultimate checkpoint, like, what if we're together? Are we going to race or are we not going to race? And I think we decided that at the time, if either of us, one of us was clearly fitter than the other and had a chance of catching someone in the front, they would go. But if that wasn't clear, then we'd run together. So he was way ahead. Then I was way ahead. Then he caught me on the long descent, which was always going to be his strength, at the penultimate checkpoint. And then you've got 2 more big climbs. And we did run those together. I could have probably pushed a bit more on some of the climbs. He could have probably pushed a bit more on the descent. It's quite clear who would have won had there been a sprint finish, but I won't reveal that here. You can work that out however you like. And yeah, we finished together, and it was the right thing to do. We'd spent so much time like discussing the course, learning about it, training for it, and it was for both of us. It was a massive time improvement. And if one of us had tried to break the other, we'd still probably not have, by that point, we wouldn't have caught Gautier, who was finished 10 minutes in front of us. Like, maybe one of us could have taken a few minutes out of it. Impossible to know, because also running together, you move some bits quicker and some bits slower. So yeah, it felt like the right thing to do, and it created a story for us, and it made it quite a memorable day in a different way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had race finishes where there was one years ago. It was like just before lockdown. I'd been sort of chasing. I was in third place chasing the 2 guys together at the front. I'm really good friends with one of them now, Matt, and they were sort of in the distance, and I was, when you like, you can see someone in the distance, and you like, I know I've got them. You know that you've got them by the way that they're moving and stuff. And I was like, right, I know that I've kind of got them on a string now, and I'm not going to let them go before the end of the race, and I'm going to plan my attack and like move up and go past them. Sort of took a turn when they disappeared, ran the turn. We ended up going over a field, and I was like, disappeared. Where have they? Understand where they've gone? So I just like thought, well, obviously they've put their foot down. They've seen that I'm behind them. They've like going for it. So I sped up. And then like a few minutes later, I'm going over a field, and I hear shouting behind, and and it's these 2 lads, Matt and I can't remember the name of the other guy. And they're like shouting and waving at me, and I'm like, I must have gone off course. I must be following my watch. I'm thinking it's saying I'm on course, but maybe maybe they know better, and maybe I'm not gone off course. So I waited for him, and this lad, not Matt, comes up like shouting, you've cut the course, you've cut the course. I was like, have I? Didn't know I've cut the course. I've just been following my watch, and I've just been following the route on here. No, you cut the course. No, we went a different way. And I was like, well, I haven't got a clue. I don't think I've cut the course, but if you think I've cut the course, then so we just started talking, and we all ran together then. And there was probably only like 2 miles left of the race, and we were just chatting, and I'm thinking all the time. I'm thinking I don't want to be. Well, I want to be like pushing on. But it's like this conversation was sort of took hold, and we were like discussing, all sorts of things and chatting and everything. And I'm thinking it's getting really awkward now, because all I want to do is like just run ahead, because I know that I can beat both of you. And in the end, we had a chat, and they talked about the morality of whether I'd cut the course and stuff. And in the end, I just thought, I'll take one for the team now. I'm not. I said I'd won a race like earlier, like in the year, like a few months before. I've won a race this year, and this guy was like, I've never run a race before, and Matt was like, I've never been on the podium before. I was like, I'm absolutely fine being third. It's okay. It's okay. What do you want to do? I'll be third. It's okay. And we ended up running in like a train, and like sort of like only like sort of a couple of feet between each other, and it must have looked ridiculous, like it's like nobody sprinting for the finish line. All the time I'm thinking I could have left you 2 miles, could have gone, and I could have sprint finished this. But these are, being a good sportsman sometimes is more important than
100%. And I think it would have made so much difference to, like, had Keith and I raced each other over the last like 2 hours. We weren't like looking at the splits, we weren't hanging about. Like we were still making decent progress. But how we raced each other, it would have made, you know, one of us would then finish like a minute or two up on the other one, and it would have just been like, well, why did we do that? Why did we just like, why did we run together? I think it would probably be different at I mean, we're not racing the same race, but I think if Keith and Tom come together over coming to Valoncine together for the last 2 hours over to Chamonix at the end of UTMB, there'll probably be who can go deeper, because they've got that wager on one of them wearing a chicken costume if they lose.
Yeah, that's
which
it.
they practically didn't mention last week, but yeah.
No, I don't know. I don't know how that didn't get brought up. Actually, that was I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten to ask that question about the chicken suit. But basically, if whoever loses, what is it? Has to wear a chicken suit down
Yeah,
through
the next day in Chamonix. And I guess if they finish together, they both have to wear one. So
yeah, that is a good point. So they need to pony up for two chicken suits.
yeah.
Right. Look at my questions. So what are your sort of plans going forward then? Is this sort of
After season
like,
2.
yeah, so is this like a step in, are you sort of planning out sort of, I know that because this is kind of like coming towards the end of the summer
Yeah.
season of training, and like UTMB and all the UTMB races are kind of seen as like the
pinnacle, yeah.
last hurrah in the season sort of thing. But how are you sort of thinking as far as in terms of going forward with races?
So I don't think it'll be my last hurrah of the season. So I'm hoping that I can run well, I've got a spot at Templiers. So the Grand or the Grand, whichever whether you're English or French in your pronunciation. So that's another big competitive European trail race, another, you know, very, very deep field in October. So I'm hoping it's this in August, then a couple of weeks off or very easy, and then another block, and then Templiers in October. And then the chance of anything significant over November and December is there's nothing really there. I would like to squeeze in a few more fell races, but this year I've had this real odd relationship with fell races, which I've run 2, one in February and then one of the Leyland Classics Annandale in the middle of summer. And I love them, but they're really intense races. And so you can't, so you should ask Gavin Dale. I don't know if you speak to him about his relationship with them, because we sort of debate this a bit, and he loves to race and uses races as training sessions. And I sort of keep telling myself that I can use races as training sessions, but then this year I've probably pulled out 3 or 4 races I was planning to run, because I was like, well, what's the best use of this weekend? Is it to go and race Wasdale, for example, which looked like a cracking race and wish I'd done it? Or is it to go and do a longer run at an easier tempo and do a hike the next day that aligns with my goals for the season and mean I can train properly next week rather than taking like 2-3 days off? And every time I've come down on the this second one. So I'm hoping that in the second half of the season, maybe I'll have a bit more flexibility in myself. But with a race like Templiers, I don't think that's going to happen. So it's going to be another A goal. And then next year, well, I no idea if I'm good enough or not, but I'd love to put my name in the ring for Worlds, which is at the end of next year, and that will obviously be competitively applied for, and hopefully competitively.
How do you do that? Realistically, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I was so there was Euros as well this year, right, in Annecy, and I was first reserve for that.
Wow.
And had Tom Evans been injured a week earlier, I wouldn't have raced UTS, and I'd have been called up and I'd have raced this, but I'd locked in on UTS by that point, and so it was too late. And so James Tilley, I think, got the call up for this year, and that was based on the TGC performance. So there is a published selection policy on the UKA website, and that involves a trial race, which is what is it next year for the 100k? It's is it Skyline Snowdon, or it's it's the Sky Race in Snowdonia? I can't remember the name. Apex running event.
Yeah.
It's basically the Welsh 3000s route as a race. So Nails route, and that's a qualifier. And so if you place really highly there, you qualify. But then there's only a certain number of qualification places, and the rest are based on a panel's choice, which is broadly informed by performances in elite races of a similar distance. So things like CCC, Templiers, World Trail Majors style races are generally taken into account. But yeah, so I mean, I'd love to try and qualify for that, and I'm doing everything I can. Who knows? You have to be in the ring, and you have to run some races, and then if you do well, then you might qualify. If you don't, keep trying.
Yeah, that's it. What sort of have you got sort of plans sort of going any further than that? Are you sort of thinking, working with this new team, do they set
Mhm.
out like like a 2 or 3 year like plan for you going forward where you're sort of
Interesting.
aiming towards something?
No, maybe they have done with some of the runners, depending on how they think or what motivates them. I'm pretty
Mm.
motivated by like annual challenges, and that's been a good strategy for the last few years. And maybe I need to think about a longer term plan. No, but my current plan is to just be as competitive as I can be over this kind of 80 to 100K distance. I'm still not that attracted by this 100-mile thing, as much as Keith and John tried to convince me otherwise, that it's the pinnacle of the sport and blah blah blah. I don't really. I'm still happy with the more racy feel of a 80 to 100K race, and I really think Transgran Canaria, for example, the advanced really summarizes that. That feels like a race the whole way, and you're running all of the last climb at the top end, and so that I like that feel. Which I think 100 miler begins to have, especially unless you're like Jim, has a slightly different feel. So yeah, I'm just trying to. I like that distance a lot. It's I think I'm probably more competitive over it than I am over the kind of 50K
Mm.
distance, where there's a whole another set of elite athletes to deal with. So yeah, that's where I'm kind of going. But it could go either way, right? So I'm excited by this phase, but it could stay in this phase, or it could go to longer stuff, and I could start thinking about, some of the long national FKTs, coast to coast attempts, or things like that. Or you could go the other way and start thinking about those like elite, shorter Golden Trail style races. It's really
Mm.
exciting. I mean, the sport's come on so much in the last sort of 3 years, even since I've been in it. And so I see lots of sort of spoiled for choice rather than. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with this like 80 to 100K zone for the moment, and like basing my training and planning and fueling and stuff around that.
Yeah.
And I think I've got another year or two of that in me, and then maybe I'll reevaluate.
Well, that is the beauty of ultra running, isn't it? That you can be a specialist or you can be a non-specialist and
Yeah.
just or find your niche or just keep trying different races and different distances. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great sport. Really
Yeah.
taught me a lot about myself, but also offering a lot. And it's great to see it growing. I think Tom mentioned this last week, and I think it's exciting that times are getting quicker. Like, the number of a course record's broken every week. And
Mm.
I don't think you've quite got the same. There's probably other things instead of it. I'm not quite so sure that like super shoes are making the difference. Like maybe there's slightly more grip in a fell race shoe, and there are some of the like plated shoes for these long trail races.
Mm. Because that came up with
But
Western States, didn't it? That like 17 out of the top 20. So
wearing
something,
plated
yeah,
shoes.
I'm sure that was the stat. Like out of the men, it was like 17 of the top 20, and for the women, it was a bit less. But there was, yeah, I think it was Dylan Bowman that was sort of he was talking about that, saying how he trains in a speedland that have got the removable carbon plate.
Okay.
So he'd sort of almost thrown out the carbon plate and just trained in the shoe as it was. But
And
after
then do the plate in.
seeing everybody wearing carbon shoes for Western States, he's like decided he's going to put
Well,
it back.
so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about at all. What I was hoping to say was that it's slightly less affected by the like wearing springs under your feet, as it seems like the world of like shorter distance running has been,
Yeah.
with records falling and everyone broadly pointing at shoes being the biggest factor.
Mm.
Maybe
But
that is
of
a
course,
massive factor.
yeah. But the
But
course matters as well, doesn't it? So like Western States, Killian, that's what he said, wasn't he? He said the Western States is a road race. I
yeah,
think like
downhill road race
kind of that
specifically.
was it. Yeah, kind of mocking them a little bit. But some of those trails are like super, it's like
Springs.
my local, like literally across the road from me is the local trail that's a converted like railway line, and it's just
Right.
like it's great. It is gravel, but it's compact down, and they're the kind of trails that they've got over there. So maybe sort of I can't imagine as much as I love I've got some carbon Hokers that I absolutely love. Which ones are they? I can't remember which ones they are.
Yeah.
Um, and I absolutely love them for road racing. And I think that if they if they had enough grip on them, some UK races, you could probably get away with wearing them for. But the idea of going like up into the Peak District and
Yeah.
wearing carbon shoes, it just doesn't.
No.
Don't fancy falling off a rock.
No.
Yeah.
My hypothesis is, I'm going to show my note here. My hypothesis here is that the gains are coming from uh, a high level of competition, better understanding of like fueling and
Yeah.
nutrition science has changed quite a bit, and that's come out to like not just in the like elite few. It's like very well understood about the levels of fueling you kind of need for these types of performance now. Those two things, I think, I'm hoping they're driving it more than the special shoes, but
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Unless you're using Spring Energy for your nutrition.
Yeah, in which case you're low training all the
Yeah,
time.
that adapted.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you coming on and giving us a bit of an insight into your training, and looking forward to see how you're doing at the race. So I'm sure if I'm there, there's questions about whether I'm going to be there now.
Oh,
Yeah, I won't go into too much detail, but there's the possibility of a family funeral happening
oh,
that week. So I don't know. It's we'll see what happens this week, but I'm still hoping to be there. But it might end up just being me rather than me bringing the whole family. Like,
yeah, everyone along. Well, whatever way, so I'm sorry to hear that, and yeah, hopefully you do get out. But if you don't, I'm sure it's for the right.
yeah, race will still be there next year. So either
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah,
But I don't want to end the podcast on a negative note. So looking forward to, if I do manage to get out there, I'm looking forward to seeing everybody that I sort of chatted with, and I'm going to carry on doing these interviews leading up to the race and trying to get as many people on that are racing and stuff. So if you know any people that you can twist the arm of that you can send my way for pre-race interviews, let me know as well.
Well, we could just shout about them on the. I could just shout us a few names for the CCC. So there's probably, I think is it 3 really top ranked Brits running it who've made it into the like elite 10 like start list. Like there's a list that UTMB well they've
Yeah,
got.
I have looked, but I haven't looked in detail.
But yeah,
So
I think it's Ronnie, Harry, and Luke Grenfell Shaw.
yeah,
The 3 who are up there. But yeah, watch out, coming.
Hugh's coming for you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, mate. Appreciate you coming on and giving us a bit of time. Thanks, mate. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Cheers.